إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا وعلى محمد وعلى آل سيدنا وعلى محمد صلاة دائمة مقبولة فأدلها من القول العظيم نحمده ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين صدق الله مولانا العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الأمين المكين الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين خوف أعظم ومن ليس وصانا مدد الولاية مدد آباء الإمام مدد قادری نعرہ خوف أعظم بزنم لمز شیخ احمد رضا قرب عالم بزنم سیدی یا مرشدی شاہ مصطفیٰ زندہ باد مسلک سرکار اعلیٰ حضرت زندہ باد یا الہی مسلک احمد رضا زندہ باد حفظ نام سے رسالت کا جو ذمہ دار ہے سیدی یا مرشدی شاہ مصطفیٰ زندہ باد حامل فیض رضا مصطفیٰ مدار صلی اللہ علیہ نبی مدنی وآلہ صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم صلاة وسلام عليك يا سيدي يا سندي يا حبيبي يا طبيبي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا رحمة للعالمين. All praise is due to Almighty Allah. Noor and salams upon the most perfect, exalted and glorified of Allah's creation, Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. His blessings and salutations upon the Anbiya Kiram, Ahlul Afthab, Sahaba Kiram, Khulafa Rashidin, Tabi'in, Tabi'in, Imam Mujtahidin, Awliya Kamilin, and all those who follow their path until the last day. We thank Almighty Allah for His infinite mercy and to the wasila of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for holding us the opportunity to congregate in Salat al-JUMMAH and to prostrate in His most exalted court. Before continuing, let us direct our hearts and our thoughts and our minds towards the holy and the sanctified court of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We bring some just collectively recite the Sharif. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina wa nabiyina wa ala Muhammadin wa ala ali sayyidina wa ala Muhammadin wa ashabihi wa barik wa sallim sallu alayhi salatu wa salamun alayhi ya sayyidi ya sanadi ya habibi ya tabibi ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alika wa ashabika ya rahmatan lil alamin. Allah Almighty, by His divine grace and by His mercy, has indeed placed upon this earth, those pious servants of Allah who are a means and a zariya for us to attain closeness in His divine court. And over the last few weeks, this is the topic that I have been discussing. And last week, if you remember, that I discussed and explained that the levels of piety, taqwa and virtue are not specified to men, but there are those amongst women who have reached very great maqams in the court of Almighty Allah. Those who have attained immense nearness in the court of Almighty Allah because of their devotion and their sincerity in the court of Allah Almighty, because of their khawf khuda, because of their fear for Almighty Allah. And if you go back in history, you will find glowing examples of such women in the history of Islam. And last week, I briefly discussed with you a few personalities amongst the women that were totally absorbed in the love of Allah and His beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they manifested this love, this piety, this taqwa to those who came to them, to those who were in their communities. And this is why we find that if we ask ourselves the question that in those times and in that generation, why was it that there were so many pious children? Why is it that there were so many pious families? It's because the women of the house was pious. That was the reason. was because the women of the house was pious. It was because the mother or the sister was pious. It was because the wife was pious. And this piety in that zamana was piety that was in the real sense. It was indeed for the pleasure of Almighty Allah. And we talked last week, I gave you an example of HAZRAT Sayyidina Rabia Basariya Adawiya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And I explained her taqwa and her piety in the court of Almighty Allah. I also explained to you the narration of HAZRAT Sayyidatuna Hamra radiyallahu ta'ala anha and another pious woman. And today I'm going to continue with that discussion as I promised last week. I'm going to continue with that discussion because I want you to take this discussion home. I want you to take this discussion home. It is very important. And for our women folk to understand that Allah has given them this ability and this capacity as well to become close in His court. This is not about men only. Okay? Allah has given men a different level, He has given women a different level. But real status is based on taqwa. It is based on the fear for Almighty Allah. It is based on ibadat and piety, that Allah grants you closeness in His court. It has been mentioned that if in a community or in a home or in a family, you have a woman whose heart is attracted to the court of Almighty Allah, everything in that house will become nurun ala nur. Everything in that house will be illuminated. Why? Because when she will wake up in the morning, the first thing that she will be concerned about is performing her Salatul Fajr. And when she is concerned about performing her Salatul Fajr, she will make sure that her children are out of their beds and on their musallas as well. When she goes to pick up something in her home, then she will say Bismillah before she picks it up. When she goes to cook anything, she will do so with the name of Almighty Allah, and there will be barakat in the meals and in the rizq of that house. So it is very important, and it plays a very important part in the life of a Muslim to have a pious woman in your home. Okay? Be it your mother, or be it your sister, or be it your daughter, or be it your wife. Allah has blessed those women as well with this tawfiq that they may reach levels of piety. But why is it that in this zamana, women to apne jagah, look at us. Look at the men, look at the heart of the men. How many people strive for piety? How many men and women strive for piety? Look at the condition in our homes. Look at the condition in our communities. Today, we want to be the examples of the West. We want to do what the kuffar are doing. Yet, Allah has given us the most beautiful role models. Allah has given us the most perfect examples. Can you ever you shouldn't even ask the question and say you cannot. You cannot find a better example in character, in beauty, and in every other way for a woman than Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu ta'ala, than Aisha al-Siddiqa, than Khadija al-Kubra. These people knew the value. They knew how precious it was to honor that which Allah has given you. It has been mentioned, HAZRAT Sayyidina Imam Yafa'i radiallahu anhu, HAZRAT Sayyidina Imam Yafa'i radiallahu anhu mentions that there was a slave girl. Two examples for today. And listen with your heart, because these are discussions that have to do with the heart. Okay? Hazrat Imam Yafa'i radiallahu anhu mentions that there was a slave girl whose name was Jawhar. Her name was Jawhar. And she lived in the palace of the king. And one day the king set her free. It was a time of slaves. She lived there as a slave girl in the palace, and one day the king set her free. He made her azad. Imam Yafa'i radiallahu anhu says after he released her, after he gave her freedom, she went on the journey into the dunya. All she knew was the walls that she lived within. So she had to now go. So she went out into the dunya, and one day she passed by a broken down old inverted commas shack. A broken down old shack. She passed by, and who used to live in there? There was a budurg by the name of HAZRAT Abu Abdullah Turabi. HAZRAT Sayyidi Abu Abdullah Turabi radiallahu anhu used to live inside there. So when she passed by, she noticed him from the side of her eye in ibadat. He was making ibadat. So she saw that he was engrossed in his ibadat. So she waited for him to finish. Imam Yafi is explaining, she waited for him to finish, and then she approached him and she said, I have a request. Will you take me to your nikah? Will you accept me in your nikah? He thought for a moment. Pious servant of Allah, he knew why she was asking that. She was not asking to enter his nikah for any worldly reason. She in her heart was thinking that when he is at this manzil and this level of the ibadat of Allah, if I enter into his nikah, then that will branch on to me also. So she said, can I enter into your nikah? See, this is what we have learned from pious. That when you enter the home of one who is involved in deen, then take his deen. Benefit from the deen. Isn't it? So she goes and she makes nikah to him, and she lives with him in this broken down shack. No mansion, no palace. In this broken down shack. And what she did, whenever he stood up to make ibadat, she stood up to make ibadat. Whenever he became engrossed in ibadat, she became engrossed in ibadat. But it happened such that one night she had gone to sleep. One night, HAZRAT Jawhara had gone to sleep. And while she was asleep, she has a dream. And in that dream, she sees that there are lines and lines of tents. Beautiful, beautiful tents. And she looks at the tents in her dream and she asks somebody, whose tents are these? To whom do these tents belong? Who do these tents belong to? So in her dream she hears a voice. It is for those who sincerely read Tahajjud namaz. It is for those who sincerely read Tahajjud namaz. She got up immediately. She got up immediately from her sleep and she started performing Tahajjud namaz. But her sincerity was to this level that from that night, for the rest of her life, she never slept at night. Allah. She never slept at night. She spent the entire night reading Tahajjud Salah. She spent the entire night in the ibadat of Allah. And when Abu Abdullah Turabi radiallahu anhu would fall asleep because of so much of ibadat and all the other things that he would do, she would go and wake him up at night. She would go and wake him up at night and say, Abu Abdullah, wake up. Wake up. The caravan has already passed us. Abu Abdullah, wake up. The caravan has already passed us. And she would read one share. She would read some poetry to him. And the gist, I'm translating for you the gist of that poetry. She would say, still far away is my final destination. Oh Abdullah, Abu Abdullah, still far away is my final destination. I have not even reached the walls of that garden. Oh Abu Abdullah, still far away is my final destination. I have not yet reached the walls of that garden. There are tents scattered here and there on one location. There are tents scattered here and there on one location. If you do not leave your sleep, you will not reach that exalted station. If you do not leave your sleep, you will not reach that exalted station. Look at her piety. Look at her taqwa. When she married, she was already pious. But when she married a man of piety, a man of deen, what happened? She made that her libas. She made that her way of life. And Allah gave her that maqam that today, hundreds of years after, we are talking about her in Africa when she was from those beautiful lands. What was this about? It was about taqwa. It was about parhezgari. It was wanting to be close to Almighty Allah. When you have the opportunity and you have a means that can take you close to Allah, then do not ever deprive yourself of that means. Why? Because you will not get it again. This is how they live their lives. Another beautiful example I'm going to give you an end today, very quickly. You know, there's a place called Kerman, and the king of Kerman, the Baadshah of Kerman, one day he sent a marriage proposal
And this narration that I'm presenting, it's got to do with ruhaniyat. So you have to read between the lines. I'll try to explain. The king of Kirman sent a marriage proposal to the daughter of HAZRAT Sheikh Shah Kirmani Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. Very pious person, but also a very wealthy person. Allah blessed him with everything. So he sent a proposal of marriage for the daughter of HAZRAT Sheikh Shah Kirmani radiallahu ta'ala, the king of Kirman, sent this proposal. When the Sheikh received this proposal, that the king has sent a proposal for marrying my daughter. Who will refuse if a king wants to marry your daughter? Okay? Proposal came. He sent a message back to the king. He said, wait 3 days. Wait 3 days, I will respond after 3 days. Whether I will give my daughter to you or not. And in that 3 days, what did the Shaykh of Kirman, Shah Kirman, what did he do? Before answering the Badshah, the king, what did he do, Shah Kirman? He started going and looking at the masjids in the poverty-stricken areas. In the poverty-stricken areas, in those 3 days, he went searching in the masjid. What was he searching for? He went in search and looking for a young pious man. He went to look for a young pious man. He would go from masjid to masjid. And during these 3 days, one day his sight fell upon a young man dressed in tattered and torn garbs in the ibadat of Almighty Allah. And when he looked at him, he found him performing his namaz with total devotion. He found him performing ibadat as he should perform his ibadat. And he noticed that after he completed his salah, he raised his hands and made dua in the court of Almighty Allah. He went up to him. The Shaykh Kirmani went up to him and he looked at the young man, tattered and torn clothes. He says to him, are you married? He goes to him. Remember, the king has asked for his daughter's hand. And he has gone out in those 3 days looking for what? A young man. But he doesn't go here and there. He doesn't go to look in a wedding. He doesn't go to look in the bazaar. He goes and searches in the masjid. Where do we look for son-in-laws? Where do we look for hands for our daughters today? In the dunya. We look at wealth. We look at everything else. We forget piety and taqwa. So he goes and he finds this young man. He says, are you married? So the boy replies in the negative that he wasn't married. The Shaykh says, do you wish to make nikah? The girl recites the Quran. She punctually performs her salah. She spends her days fasting. She is very beautiful. She is very chaste. And she is very virtuous. Are you willing? The young man looks at him and says, who would want to give their daughter to me? Who would want to give their daughter to me? Who would want to marry their daughter to me? The Shaykh smiles and says, I will give my daughter to you. And he gives him a few dirhams in his hand. He says, take 1 dirham and buy roti. Not Masjid Benz. Take 1 dirham and buy roti. Take 1 dirham and buy some curry. Take 1 dirham, buy roti. Take 1 dirham, buy some salad, buy some soup, buy some food. And take 1 dirham and buy some perfume, some itar. Bring it and come. He gives him the money to do this. So he goes and he buys 1 dirham roti, 1 dirham of the curry or the gravy or whatever soup, and then 1 dirham he buys khushbu. It comes back to him, tells him come at this time, day or next day or whenever. So he comes back and then he performs his nikah to his daughter. He marries his daughter to this man who doesn't even have money. Okay. Then after the Shaykh performs the nikah, he says to his daughter, now go to the house of your husband. You must know he was a very affluent person. He was a pious person, but he had everything. He says, go to the house of your husband. So she goes to the house of the husband. And when she enters the house, I want you to listen from here very carefully. Subhanallah. When she enters the house, learn from the pious one. Tell our families about it. She enters the house. And when she enters the house, she finds one roti lying on a sarahi, on a clay jug. In the old days they had these earthen pots. So she finds one roti lying on top. She looks at the husband. First day, came to the house of the husband. She says, what is this roti for? One dry roti lying on that. What is this? He said, this is yesterday's stale bread that I kept for today's iftar. Allah. This is yesterday's stale roti that I kept for today's iftar. When she heard this, she turns around and goes back to the door. When she hears this, right, this man's only got one piece of, one stale bread in his house, and that too he kept it for his iftar today. The moment she hears this, she backtracks and she starts walking towards the door of her home, of his house. The young man looks at her and he says, I knew that the daughter of Sheikh of Kerman will not be able to last in my house. I knew she won't be able to live here. There are no comforts. The young woman, his wife, looks at him and she says, I'm not thinking of returning because of you having one piece of bread. It's not about that. I am not returning due to your poverty. I am thinking of returning because it seems like your yaqeen in Allah is very weak. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. I am thinking of returning because it seems like your yaqeen in Allah is very weak. She says, in fact, I am shocked that my father thought that you are a very virtuous and pious person with many blessed attributes. When your state of trust in Almighty Allah is so weak that you have to keep a bread from yesterday for today. You don't have yaqeen that Allah will give you risk today. Your yaqeen is so weak. This is a very deep and very profound discussion. Something to think about. That you don't have, you kept that one dry bread for today because you wanted to have it for iftar. You are making ibadat for Allah, you are fasting for Allah, and you don't have yaqeen that that Rabb who gave you iftar yesterday will give you iftar today. This is why I am returning. This is why I am going away. That you had to keep aside a piece of roti. After listening to what she had to say, the young man replies, Subhanallah. The young man replies, he says, I sincerely apologize for my shortcoming. This is a real shortcoming. This is what you apologize for. You apologize for dini shortcoming. In reality, his shortcoming wasn't a shortcoming. His level of taqwa was something else and her level of taqwa was something else. He says, I sincerely apologize for the shortcoming. She said, it is you who understands your own excuse. She says, it is you who understands your own excuse. But I cannot live in such a house where food is hoarded for one day. Allah. Look at our homes and look at how much we keep for no need. Look at how much we cook and how much we throw. Think about it. These are things we need to think about. I'm not saying do not buy stuff, do not buy groceries. No, but this is a level of piety we are trying to show you. I want to explain, and my aim and objective is this, for us to understand and for us to teach our women in our house that how were the women of then and how were the women of now. Why has it changed so much? She says to him that I cannot live in that same house where food is hoarded for one day. And you know what she says? She says, I'm willing to stay. I'm willing to stay. Either I go or the roti goes. Either I go or that one roti that you got, it goes. The young man immediately took the bread and he gave it sadaqah. He gave it in khairat and made shukr in the court of Almighty Allah that Allah blessed him with a wife who took him to that level of taqwa. I want you to pay attention to what I said today. Let your wives listen. Tell them about it. If you want to listen to the Jummah lectures, I don't intentionally share to show anything about me. Maulana Ahmad Sabir records the lectures and they're available if you need them. Let your family listen. It's very important what we say. We are not saying this because we have stood here to entertain anybody. We are doing this so that we can make a difference in our communities. We can make a difference in our homes, and our mothers and our daughters and our sisters and our wives understand that taqwa is not only for men. When somebody can become Khaja Gharibun Nawaz, then somebody can become Rabia Basri also. for us to understand this, for
Narayan
us to
Takbir.
realize this.
Narayan
And
Risalah.
then it will make a huge change in our environment and in our community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and khair. May we understand, and may the women, the Muslim women in the dunya understand their maqam and their fazilat. May they understand how fortunate they are, how blessed their destinies are, especially if they have somebody to guide them in the deen of Almighty. Allah grant us tawfiq and khair. All those that have asked us to make dua for them, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them with whatever they have asked for. Those who are in the community, Allah grant them shifa kamil sehat ajil. Dua for Sister Farida, Allah grant them shifa kamil sehat ajil. All others that have asked me to make dua for them, making dua for them as well for whatever they requested. Dua for all the marhums of the Ahl Sunnah, Allah exalt them in Jannatul Ma'in. Special dua for the Sunni Muslims of Palestine, the Muslims throughout the world that are going through any difficulties. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove their difficulties and make it easy for them. And may Allah ta'ala keep us with Iman. And when the time comes for us to leave this world, may we leave with the kalima la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ma'alayhi wa sallam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.